Well, the White House insists the highest priority right now is the safe and urgent return of American hostages that are being held captive by Hamas in Gaza. Secretary of State Blinken and the president himself managed this diplomatically. All the public-facing angles behind the scenes, the U.S. intelligence community is working furiously to glean any information they can about the approximately 10 American hostages still remaining. Let's bring in Dan Hoffman, former CIA station chief, also a Fox News contributor. Dan, Secretary Blinken spoke earlier this morning about some of the machinations going on behind the scenes. Take a listen. I want to get your response.
Acts are what speak, not words, particularly coming from Hamas. But we've been engaged, as I said, with partners. One of the first things that I did after the horrific attack of October 7th and hostages were taken, men, women, young children, elderly people, it's extraordinary, was to talk to everyone we could who might have influence with Hamas in terms of releasing them.
So, Dan, what is the intelligence community doing now to kind of help in this effort? I imagine the first thing they have to do is identify these people, and then they have to locate them.
It's extraordinarily difficult, and remember that this is in the wake of Israel's most significant intelligence failure since the Yom Kippur War. So Israel didn't have the human sources that they would have needed to warn them of that attack, and that is an indication of how difficult it's going to be to find these hostages who are likely being held below ground in tunnels and being moved around repeatedly. So yeah, I'm quite sure that based on my experience, the United States intelligence community is mounting a full court press to collect any bit of intelligence they can on the location of these hostages. We're working with our foreign liaison intelligence partners to do that, but it's a very tall order. Without U.S. persons on the ground in Gaza, it's extremely difficult.
What is the most challenging component of the process, do you estimate?
Based on my experience, particularly focused on U.S. hostages in Iraq or in Afghanistan, it's having a human source who can tell you where the hostage is, where they're being moved. The last thing we want to do is to see some attack against Hamas terrorists result in the death of innocent hostages who are being held alongside those terrorists. That's really the challenge there. When you launch a strike on a Hamas terrorist, you want to be at near certainty that there are no civilians in the vicinity, especially hostages. And that's a very dynamic, ongoing challenge for Israeli Defense Forces and, by extension, the United States.
Both the President and the Secretary of State have taken great pains to publicly thank the Qatari government for their help in getting the 2 Americans who were freed out on just before the weekend started. Do you think they're going to be relying on Qatar the same way moving forward, or was that a one-off? What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword when you've got a senior Hamas leader, Khaled Mishal, who's been living in Doha in Qatar for quite some time. But that does give the Qataris some leverage over Hamas. And that's the result of that was the freedom for 2 Americans being held hostage. I'm quite sure that Secretary Blinken and his team are steadfastly working to ensure that we get more hostages out through this, and one and only, it appears, means to do it effectively. I don't know that I see any other options for us diplomatically.
When we hear that the Biden administration has already or is considering sending special forces in to help free U.S. hostages, what does that mean exactly? What role do they take in all this? Are they sort of the last stage of the process? They go in to physically help those Americans get out of there, or are they involved all along?
Yeah, I think you and I remember, certainly from our experience working in the government with all sorts of meetings down at the White House, that we've looked at every option that we might have to deploy U.S. intelligence assets and military assets and our diplomatic team to try to secure the release of the hostages. Putting U.S. boots on the ground, look, the Israelis have extremely detailed and historical experience operating in Gaza. They've just been in Gaza reportedly today skirmishing with Hamas terrorists, and they were there once before to try to secure the release of some of the hostages. I think the United States might be able to provide some assistance, but frankly, the comparative advantage here is on the side of IDF. And I think the extent that we can support them, it's by collecting intelligence through other means on Iran, on Syria, on Hezbollah, to try to advise Israel of any imminent threats from second and third fronts on the Golan Heights and in Lebanon, and then to work with our Israeli counterparts as they need to release those hostages or to gain their freedom. We have some experience of our own in Fallujah and in Mosul, and those fights were long and bloody and not even applicable to Gaza. You've got narrow streets and flattened buildings and all sorts of opportunities for improvised explosive devices and explosively formed projectiles and snipers. It's a Hamas kill zone.
Before I let you go, Dan, much has been made in the media about the fact that October 7th even happened, that Hamas was able to coordinate and then implement a terror attack of this scale. A lot of folks say that it represents an Israeli intelligence failure. What are your thoughts about that?
It was, and I think at least at first glance, they appeared to be relying on a lot of their technology at the point of attack on the border and didn't have the sources inside Hamas that would have allowed them the opportunity to detect the threats way out left of Boom so that those threats could have been preempted. And instead, there was a Hamas surprise attack, which likely took months and months to prepare for. But I have no doubt that when Israel conducts the forensics, along with the United States providing assistance, that we'll learn that Iran provided Hamas not just with military equipment and lots of money, but tactical intelligence so that Hamas would be in the know about where Israel's vulnerabilities existed and how Hamas could exploit those vulnerabilities. I think we'll see that.
All right, well, Dan, we got to leave it there, but thank you for taking time with us. Learned a lot from your expertise as always.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.